Today's Subscriber Saturday video idea came from Steve DiMatteo. I hope I said your name right, but it was the next big thing prospects that flamed out. The Fernando Martinez is the Lastics Millage. So that's what we're going to talk about in this video. I went with guys that recently were big-time Mets prospects, high draft picks that have not worked out as members of the New York Mets. If you guys like this video revisiting some old players and looking at how they did and where they are now, make sure to leave a like. Comment down below if there's a certain video you would like to see for Subscriber Saturday. Other ideas that we have coming up was also from Steve. Players that were not thought of that high, but ended up doing really well. Guys like DeGrom, Murphy, Alonso. Another idea came from Brandon A, who said that I should go over all the moves that Brodie Van Wagenen made and how I feel about them now, which is going to be a pretty painful video to do, but I will do it because that's what the people like. So make sure to comment down below some Mets prospects that you remember that didn't really do too well and what you thought of them at the time and how you feel about them now. And since we're talking about Subscriber Saturday, make sure to subscribe. Getting closer to 1,000 subscribers is a big goal for me. Would really like to hit it, so really appreciate all the support I've gotten ever since I've started this channel. Let's talk about these former Mets prospects. I'll start off with Lastics Millage because he is a guy that I vividly remember. That's the first year I started watching the Mets was in 2006 when Lastics Millage made his debut. And I remember that he was a player that was thought of very highly, and I remember this one story, I'm pretty sure this happened, where when Millage first came up, he had this big gold chain on with a big cross on it, and Millage, he was a guy that liked to play to the crowd, which we'll get to later. And I believe it was Cliff Lloyd that told Millage that he had to, stop that and take the chain off, which he eventually did. So I think that's the story that happened, if I remember correctly. But overall, Lastics Millage, I mean, he was a guy that they thought was going to be a big-time prospect, number 12 pick in 2003. He also had the infamous high-fiving fans after hitting a game-tying home run against Armando Benitez against the Giants, where the Mets ended up losing in extra innings, and the team was not happy the way Millage, while the game was still going on, only a tie game, was high-fiving fans, acting like he, made the biggest play of the year. Billy Wagner ended up putting a sign on Lastics Millage's door saying, "Know your place, Rook." So that really showed the way that, the Mets veterans felt about Lastics Millage, because that team, 06, 07, 08, was more of a veteran-based team. Overall, Millage had a 241 average in 2006 with 4 home runs. He had a better year in 2007 with a 272 average, but he also did have a rap song that came out they did with his childhood friend where he said some words that the Mets organization was not happy about. Eventually, Lastics Millage ended up being traded to the Washington Nationals in the Ryan Church and Brian Schneider trade. Brian Schneider is now the current quality control coach of the Mets, and Ryan Church is a guy that I loved watching. Really unfortunate his concussion because he was having a great year at the time, and I thought they would have had an awesome year had he stayed healthy the whole time. And it's really sad that Ryan Church was here so short, and then boom, he was hurt, and we never really saw him again. Once Millage was traded, he had some good moments and bad moments with the Nationals. He played better with the White Sox, but then he signed overseas, and he is now retired and married. He is 35 years old. Lastics Millage ended up not being the player the Mets hoped that he would be. The next guy I want to go to is Mike Pelfrey, who was the number 9 pick in 2005, and Pelfrey was a very interesting guy to watch. Being 6'7" and him be falling down and having balks and licking his hands with the mouthpiece and everything. So Pelfrey definitely was always a bit of an interesting pitcher to watch every time he was on the mound. And he wasn't great when he first came up, but in 2008 and 2010, he had really good years. He started to not perform, and he had Tommy John surgery. Following the surgery, Mike Pelfrey ended up going to the Minnesota Twins, where he never really was the same. And he pitched in 2017 with the White Sox, and he is now 37 years old and is a coach for Wichita State. And he was the number 9 pick in 2005. And while he did have those 2 very good years in 2008 2010, 2 good years is not enough for a top 10 pick in my mind. As much as I loved watching Mike Pelfrey when I was younger, you would hope for a little more than that, so it's unfortunate that Mike Pelfrey could have not been a pitcher for a long time for the New York Mets. The next Mets prospect that flamed out way too quickly was Ike Davis, the number 18 pick in 2008 draft. And we remember, we like Ike, and he had really good years in 2011 and 2012, 1 year with batting average, 1 year with home runs. He also played good defense at first base, but he was misdiagnosed with a calf injury that ended up being an ankle injury after a collision with David Wright. After that, Ike Davis had valley fever, and really he just wasn't the same. He struggled in 2013 and he struggled in 2014. Then he went to the Pittsburgh Pirates and the Oakland A's, and he never really was the same player after that. Ike Davis' most recent baseball appearance was in 2017 with Team Israel, and he's only 33 years old. So, I mean, the Ike Davis, hype ended way too quickly, and it really is unfortunate because we all liked Ike, I mean, that's what we were chanting. So that was one of the more unfortunate ones recently for the New York Mets. Next player I have on my list is Kazmat Sui, who was a big-time international prospect who never really played that well when he was with the Mets. I mean, whether it was average, whether it was defense, he was supposed to be a really good defensive shortstop. Mets had to move him to second base because they had Jose Reyes. And this is another story that I think I remember correctly where Kazmat Sui had dropped a big pop-up and Willie Randolph was shaking his head like, you know what, we got a guy in between Reyes and Beltran. The next guy who had a really unfortunate Mets career is Philip Humber, the number 3 pick in 2004. Philip Humber just had way too many injuries, particularly to his arm, which really meant that he could not fully develop. Like, he would be playing in the minor leagues, then he would get hurt. And then the same thing happened with the Mets, where he would make a couple relief outings at the end of the season, didn't really blow you away, couldn't get his velocity back that he had before the injuries. Humber had to make a big start for the Mets at the end of 2007 when they were trying to, not have the playoff collapse that they ended up having, and he wasn't that good, and he ended up being in the Johan Santana trade. And with Minnesota, he didn't have much success either, and he went to a ton of different teams, most recently with the San Diego Padres on a minor league deal in 2015, and retired in 2016. He is 38 years old. So Philip Humber, I mean, the number 3 pick, and he really had no impact at all on New York Mets. At least Pelfrey had those 2 really good years and overall just made a good amount of starts for the team. Philip Humber, I mean, he did pretty much nothing for the Mets. That was just so unfortunate because, I mean, the number 3 pick, this guy was drafted right after Justin Verlander. Like, if Verlander was on the board, Mets would have took him and be like, all right, fine, we'll have to take Philip Humber instead. Super unfortunate story with him. The next guy I put on my list was Gavin Shakini, a much more recent one, the number 12 pick in 2012. He went 2 for 7 at the end of 2016 in his first major league appearances with the Mets. He played 32 games in 2017, but only batted .208. After that, he signed a minor league deal with the Diamondbacks in 2020, but he was released, and he decided that he was going to play for the Constellation Energy League. That was a league that was created for the COVID-19 pandemic, just so Shakini could have some time to play, and he's currently a free agent right now. He's only 27 years old, but I mean, all he did for the Mets was play in 40 games, batted, .208 in 2017, and that was it. That was his whole Mets career after being a number 12 pick. At one point in the Mets system, he was the number 2 prospect. So that was another one that really did not work out and was very recently, 2017. And this guy, again, another guy that did not have much of an impact with the Mets. And lastly, he had to be on here. I mean, Steve mentioned him, Fernando Martinez, big-time international prospect. Really looked like he was going to be the next big thing for the organization. But, he had his injuries too in the minor leagues. Once Martinez had those injuries, he did not have the same projections for how good he was supposed to be. But he debuted in 2009, and along with injuries, once again, he did not perform in the major leagues. Even when he was healthy and playing, only hit .227 for the Mets. He ended up going to the Astros, and he went to the Yankees, and he couldn't find any success. And his career ended in 2013 after being connected to the biogenesis steroid scandal. Martinez actually still does play some baseball. He played for Spain in the 2019 European Baseball Championship, and he played for the Africa-Europe 2020 Olympic Qualification Tournament in 2019, and he's only 32 years old. I mean, that has to be the most disappointing one because this guy was thought of so highly, and he had hardly any impact at all. He didn't play in that many games, and again, even when he played, he wasn't any good. And the sad thing about Martinez, he's always going to be a guy that's thought of like, forever. Fernando Martinez, big Mets prospect, never worked out. You're always just going to feel that way about him. And I think that, let's say 10 to 15 years from now, 3 guys I think could end up being on this list is going to be Rafael Monteiro, who he was supposed to be better than DeGrom, ended up not being better with DeGrom. Yes, he's been better for the Rangers, but for the Mets, he was not very good at all. Didn't have any big-time impact for the team. Ahmed Rosario, I mean, he was supposed to be the number 1 prospect in all of baseball. Him and Gleyber Torres were supposed to be the guys, and Rosario, while he had a good second half every now and then, it wasn't sustainable for the Mets. Menez was going to play over him this year regardless, so Rosario, I've always been very disappointed in him because he has so much talent, but has never been able to put together the consistency. Another prospect that I would be disappointed in is Matt Harvey because he's a guy that was taken in the first round in the dark night. He was off to such a great start in his career. Obviously, 2015 was amazing, but then the injuries and got very distracted off the field and things like that. And Harvey was never the same pitcher ever again. And now he has bounced around the league, and it's hard for him to even find a team to pitch for. So Matt Harvey definitely is one of the saddest stories because I loved Harvey when he came up and he was the Dark Knight and the Mets went to the World Series in 2015. How could you not love him with how good he was pitching and how good the team was playing? But, it's a sad story, and that happens to a lot of organizations. Has happened to the Mets too much, unfortunately, and we hope that stuff like this becomes less frequent. with this new ownership and Sandy Alderson being in charge. So I hope you guys enjoy this, revisiting some, unfortunate past for certain Mets prospects. And again, let me know what players that you remember, young guys that you were excited for that ended up not panning out. And until the next one, be safe, be smart, be healthy, and let's go Mets.